Hello and welcome back to Oscar Recap. Today we will recap.
This is the fastest way to make money ever. You only need to stay awake for 3 days. You can easily get $100,000 if you accidentally fall asleep. If you fall asleep and don't wake up within a minute, you'll die. It's a high risk, though, but because of the pressure of the mortgage, Mary chose to take part in the experiment anyway. The bearded man injects a chip into her neck, used to extract curatropin from the human body. This substance can cure brain death in humans. There is also a watch that it shows the progress of the curatostatin extraction. If you reach 100, you'll be well on your way to the 100,000 prize. It just so happened that Mary had recently been studying for her exams. That night, Mary studied until 2 o'clock in the morning. When she looked at her watch, the number had risen to 40. The next day, Mary was eating in the school canteen when Jack, a fellow student, came up to her and asked her if she had taken part in the experiment. Mary withdrew her hand, but to her surprise Jack showed his watch. It turns out that it wasn't just Mary who was involved in the experiment, but also Jenny, the year's beauty blogger, and Tom, the gaming geek, were also taking part. Soon, they started to get to know each other. Mary also exchanged phone numbers with them. Afterwards, they began to talk to each other and spend time in their own way. Soon, 3 days had passed. The four of them completed the experiment with ease. The professor gave them their prize money. As promised, the money came so easily. With the money in hand, Mary quickly paid off the loan. Jack bought a luxury watch. Jenny went to the beauty parlor and got a facial. And Tom upgraded his gaming gear. But the four of them are not content with that. After all, the money is so easy to come by. After all, it's so easy to get paid for not sleeping. So they went to the lab. They decided to take part in a second round of experiments. But the bearded man says this challenge would require 5 whole days without sleep. In order to extract a higher concentration of curatos, the prize was raised to $500,000. Tempted by the money, the men are determined to take part in the experiment. However, this time it didn't go so well. Just 5 days without sleep, and you get $500,000 in prize money. She hadn't slept for 3 days and 3 nights, because as soon as she slept she would die. A few days ago, Mary and 3 classmates took part in this experiment. By the 4th day, several people had begun to hallucinate. Jack was playing basketball when he heard someone swear at him. He then threw a punch. His friend said he hadn't heard anything. Mary was in anatomy class when she saw the body move on its own. She was so scared that she ran out of the room. They then meet in the canteen, but this time, everyone's keratosin increased slowly, but Jack's numbers were higher than everyone else's. Mary guessed it might have something to do with his love of exercise. At the end of the night, the four of them came to Tom's house for a party. They started singing and dancing, and keep their bodies moving all the time. But after a short time, everyone was exhausted. Then, Jack added a stimulant to the drinks. This kept people awake, but the side effects were particularly serious, with $500,000 in the bag. If he falls asleep, if they fell asleep, their hearts would stop beating immediately, so the men downed their drinks, and so they drink their drinks and begin to party again. Curatosol's numbers were rising. Suddenly, Jenny heard her own voice. She followed the sound and looked for it. She pushed open the door and was stunned. There were videos and photos of herself everywhere. It turns out that Tom has a crush on Jenny. Tom has a crush on Jenny and is socially phobic, so he has to take a sneak peek. Jenny instantly passes out from the excitement. The watch also sounds an alarm. Luckily, Mary is the best at CPR. She was saved at the last second of the countdown. Their curatosin was extracted at this point. The next day, several people came to the lab to finish their experiments. The bearded man wanted them to take part in a third round of experiments. The prize was $1 million, but it was more important than their lives. They all refused. They went back and slept for 3 days and 3 nights. That's when they finally recovered. But as fate would have it, Mary's grandmother suddenly became seriously ill and was hospitalized. The cost of the operation is so high that Mary is unable to pay for the operation. Her sister gives Mary a large sum of money. When she sees the sign on the top and learns that her sister has also taken part in the sleeping experiment, she rushes to the office. The bearded man is blackmailing Mary into bringing the other 3 to her for a third round of experiments. Otherwise, her sister's chip will never be taken out. The experiment requires 10 days of sleep deprivation. 10 days without sleep, and you get $1 million prize. In order to save Mary's sister, 4 people are forced to take part in an experiment that, if they sleep, they will die. Mary has to call on her teacher to help her. The teacher injected them with a refreshing potion. It was only on the 6th day that the 4 of them survived. They began to hallucinate. Jenny saw that she had chickenpox all over her face. She began to complain about Mary. By now Jack and Tom were fighting too. The situation was getting out of hand. Mary tried to get help from the teacher, but she found several large screens in the room. They were watching every move they made. Mary remembered that she had been recommended by her teacher to come to the experiment. Suddenly, the teacher appears behind Mary. She rushes back into the house. Scared, she was about to call the police when her mobile phone went dead and the door was locked. The door was locked tightly. It turns out that it was all a conspiracy by the teacher. It seemed that if she did not finish the experiment, she would die. It was the 7th day of the experiment. They start destroying things. Jenny smashes all the cameras. Suddenly, Jack collapses to the ground. The countdown on the watch ended. He doesn't even wake up. When the teacher found out, Jack was pushed out of the room. He removed the chip from his neck. The next thing he knew, the teacher had been hit with a stick, and several people rushed over. Jack was not dead. They had found a heart-stopping drug in the room to lure the teacher out. In the end, the teacher had to tell the truth. She pulls back the curtain behind her. There was her husband inside. 20 years ago, her husband had stayed awake for 10 days because of this experiment. He was hallucinating it. He jumped from a building. Although he was rescued, he was saved but became a vegetable. The teacher later discovered that curatropin can be produced when a person is awake. This was the reason for the experiment. That's why he conspired to do this experiment. In the end, the teacher was taken away by the police. The 4 men did not get the $1 million prize, but their lives were saved.
Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe and press the bell icon to never miss any updates.